Hi guys, we're back again, reading chapter 8, the final combat, and this is the thing I've been using to mark my reading. Basically, for Fire Dragon, this old version, original version. I'm not saying old version, but I'm just gonna speed read, okay? Because apparently YouTube says only 15 minutes. I don't know if people do more than 15 minutes. I don't understand. Okay, whatever. Tom swung round and whistled to Storm. The jet black stallion galloped up to him. "Come on, boy," Tom cried, leaping into the saddle. "We've got to save Elena." Tom touched his heels to Storm's side, and the horse leaped bravely forward. Over the noise of the stallion's pounding hooves, Tom could hear another roar building in. The dragon's throat. "Elena, look out!" Tom shouted. Elena looked round and saw the dragon's huge open mouth above her. She froze. As Storm galloped past Elena and Silver, Tom hurled himself from the horse's back. He landed badly, and pain shot through his ankle. But there was no time to stop. There was a boulder on the hillside close by. If they could all just get behind him, but it was too late. Ferno's eyes narrowed to fierce slits. With a roar, he blasted an enormous firebolt from his mouth. Ignoring the pain in his ankles, Tom threw himself in front of Elena and held up his shield. The fireball hit the wooden shield with such force that Tom staggered back. Flames hissed angrily around the edges of the shield, around the fringes of the shield, singeing the hairs on Tom's arm as it's just a drawing. Yes. He struggled to hold it between them and the fireball. The heat burned Tom's throat as he gulped the air, and he could see Elena's eyes watering, leaving tracks in the dirt on her face. But the shield that Jiro had given him held out. They were safe. The dragon retreated, throwing a final frustrated hiss over his shoulder. But Tom knew Ferno would return. Frantically, he threw the shield on the ground to smother the flames, and soon only thick black smoke remained in the air. The shield was scorched, but it was still in one piece. Tom swung it over his shoulder and strapped it into place and helped Elena up. He could feel her trembling. "Are you all right?" Elena nodded her head slowly, her eyes wide with shock. "I think so, thanks to you and Storm. What about Silver?" The wolf was still lying unconscious on the ground. "We can't help him until we've dealt with Ferno," Tom told her gently. "If that beast roasts us, nobody will be left to look after Silver." "You're right," Elena said, "but how?" Tom whistled for Storm, neighing loudly. The horse trotted up through the curtains of smoke. "Well done, boy. You were very fast," Tom told him, "but now you've got to be even faster." He scrambled up into the saddle. Then he leaned down and passed his sword to Elena. "Protect yourself with this." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to free the dragon," Tom cried, unfastening his shield and hooking his arm through it, ready for battle. "Wish me luck." With a whoop, he dug his heels once more into Storm's sides. The horse shot like an arrow in the direction the dragon had taken. A few moments later, out of the smoke and mist, Ferno reared up ahead. Hearing Tom and Storm, he turned his huge head towards him. Spreading his wings, he pulled back to strike. It was now or never. Fighting to keep his balance and wincing at the pain in his ankle, Tom moved into a crouching position in the saddle. The horse raced towards the beast's outstretched right wing. At the final moment, Storm ducked to gallop beneath it, and Tom leapt up into the air. With a thump, he landed on the top of Ferno's wing. It felt hard as stone, but blood-warm. The dragon flapped his mighty wings in slow, jerky sweeps. Struggling to find a handhold, Tom felt himself start to slip. With a furious hiss, the dragon whipped around and thrust his head up close to look at Tom. Seizing his chance, Tom dipped under the beast's craggy chin and threw himself at the enchanted collar around its neck. "Got you!" he cried, slipping his left arm through over the golden edge of the collar. Under here was he was safe from Ferno's fire, but now Ferno was throwing his head from side to side, trying to shake him off. Tom felt as though his arm was about to be torn off, but he gritted his teeth and held on. With his free hand, he pulled the key from around his neck and tried to fit it in the lock, but the constant movement of the dragon made it impossible. He tried to steady himself and managed to get the tip of the magic key to the edge of the lock. Nearly there! Ferno roared in anger. Let's keep drawing. Hopefully you can see it. The noise was deafening. Tom's arm burned with pain, and the world started spinning about him. Then, as the dragon flung his head up, the key slipped from Tom's fingers and fell to the ground far below. "No!" Tom yelled. The dragon threw his head forward and twisted his neck, but still Tom clung on. He had been so near to victory, but now what could he do to get the key back? Suddenly, through the drifting smoke, he saw Elena below, climbing onto Storm. She was holding her bow and arrow, and it looked as if she meant to use it. But she was aiming the arrow at him. "Your shield, Tom!" she yelled. What are you doing?" he shouted, confusing. Quickly, he shifted the grip on his collar and raised the scorched shield. Just as Elena released the arrow, with a thunk, it landed in the scorched wood. Tom peered over to the top of the shield. There was the key. Elena had found it and tied it to the end of the arrow. Good old Elena. Tom pulled the arrow and the key out of the shield. The dragon lunged forward and breathed another deadly fireball at Elena, but Storm was quicker. He thundered over the scorched grass, carrying her clear of danger. The dragon shook his head in fury. Tom felt his strength return with the key in his hand. There was still hope. For an instant, the dragon was quiet. Quickly, Tom pushed the key in the lock. It turned with a smooth click. The enchanted collar glowed a brilliant blue for a moment, then it faded away to nothing. "I did it," Tom thought. "I really did it." Then, in the same split second, he realized that now with the collar gone, he had nothing to cling on to but the key. With a shout, Tom found himself plunging towards the ground. But as Tom fell, the key suddenly rose into the air above him, pulling his arm up. Somehow it was slowing his fall. He felt the wind rise and carry him over to where Elena and Storm stood waiting. He landed softly beside them. "Yes!" he shouted, dazed and jubilant. Ferno had been free, and it felt as though he had set free something inside himself too. All his doubts and fears of failure melted away. The dragon would threaten the kingdom no longer, and Tom, with the help of his friends, had been the one to put things right. "Tom, you were almost flying," gasped Elena. "How did you do that?" "It was the key," he said, holding it up in awe. Just then Silver bounded through the smoke towards them. He was all right. Elena gathered up the panting great wolf in a hug, but her great eyes were still troubled. What about Ferno? Tom turned to face the beast. He loomed over them, and Tom had leaned back to see Ferno's red eyes, which were still fixed on him. But this time Tom wasn't afraid. "You're free now," he called out softly. "Free to protect our land and people." The fire dragon shook out his powerful wings. He dipped his huge head at Tom to acknowledge him, and then he took flight. Tom and Elena watched in silence as Ferno swooped over the dry riverbed and lashed out with his tail at the barrier of boulders. The huge rock shattered and a wave of clear water surged down the riverbed like a caged creature released. "This was just starters, Malvo," Tom said, punching the air. "I won't rest until all the beasts are free." Elena and Tom could see Ferno drinking deeply from the water of the river. Then he threw back his spiky head, roared, and launched himself into the air, leaving a rainbow of fire across the blue sky. The dragon swooped over Tom and Elena's heads. and flew towards the horizon. They watched as he disappeared into the distance. Elena turned to look at Tom. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Tom could feel his eyes brimming with happiness. "Like a hero," he replied. Storm neighed and Silver howled as if they both agreed with him. Elena and Tom burst out laughing. "Now the only question is, what's next?" said Tom. That is the end of chapter 8. I really hope you guys enjoyed. I put a lot of effort to read this because the chapters are really long in the end. Trust me. And I feel great to show this with you. And I hope you guys enjoyed. Please subscribe, hit that notification bell, and smash that like button. Otherwise, good job. Until then, see you next time.